everyone. Ready to dive into the world of 3D printing investments. We're not talking about those little desktop printers.
Oh, no.
We're going big leagues today, unpacking who's putting serious money into 3D printing and what that tells us about the future.
It's exciting.
Wow.
I think the big change now is we're moving past that early phase, where any 3D printing idea got funded.
Right, the Wild West days.
Exactly. And now it's all about results, really.
So our guide for this deep dive, it's a great article actually from 3D Printing Industry, published just the other day, January 27th, called The State of Investing in 3D Printing, Expert Insights.
Oh, I know that one, yeah.
So what you're saying is just having a cool 3D printing idea isn't enough to get investors excited anymore.
Pretty much. Investors want to see how it solves real problems.
Yeah.
Cost savings, efficiency, stuff that matters to the end user. No more hype. It's got to deliver.
Okay, so the article mentions companies making things like aerospace parts or medical implants. That makes sense, right? Those are areas where 3D printing has clear advantages.
Totally. Because those companies, they're showing how 3D printing can make these super customized, complicated parts, stuff that's just impossible with traditional manufacturing.
So they're attracting investors because they're demonstrating a real edge.
Exactly.
Now the article breaks down the investment numbers. And in 2024, 3D printer makers raked in $315 million. Material companies got $115 million. And then the companies focused on applications, like we were just talking about, they got $160 million. But what surprised me was the software side got way less.
Yeah.
It seems like software is crucial in any tech industry, so why the low investment there?
Well, I think that highlights something the industry needs. Good software to manage the whole 3D printing process, from design to actually making the part.
Right.
Investors haven't really caught on to that yet, except the article did mention Backlip. They're doing 3D printing software.
Right.
And they managed to raise $30 million.
Oh, wow. So someone's starting to see the potential.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
It's almost like the industry is saying, we've got these amazing machines, but we still need to figure out how to use them effectively. So that software gap could be a big opportunity for the right company.
Definitely.
But there are so many companies in the 3D printing space now.
I know, so many.
How do they stand out? Attract those investors who are looking for real results?
I think specialization is key. Rather than trying to do everything, companies are focusing on specific industries or even specific applications. So they become experts in that one thing.
So instead of being a jack of all trades, you become the master of one.
Exactly. And that's a much better way to stand out. And to make the most of your resources.
So you're saying, hey, we're not just any 3D printing company. We're the 3D printing company for, let's say, dental implants.
That's a great example.
They focus their energy, and they're more likely to come up with something truly innovative, something better than everyone else.
Absolutely. And that's leading to another trend. Companies are offering end-to-end solutions.
End-to-end, okay.
Not just selling you a 3D printer, but also the materials, design help, even the expertise to actually make the part.
So it's becoming a one-stop shop for all things 3D printing. A company can go to them with a problem, and they get the whole solution.
Yeah.
That has to be appealing, especially for businesses that want to use 3D printing, but they don't have the knowledge in-house.
It makes things a lot easier for them. And by doing this, these companies, they capture more value within the 3D printing world. So it's a win-win for them and the customer.
Okay. But with all the specialization and companies offering these complete solutions, I'd have thought there'd be a lot of companies merging or getting bought up by bigger companies. Is that happening in 3D printing?
You'd think so, right?
Right.
But it's been slower than people expected. There have been some acquisitions, but they haven't always worked out.
So maybe it's difficult to merge different company cultures and different technologies. I can imagine that could cause more problems than it solves.
Absolutely. You have to get the teams to work together, integrate the tech, and manage all the intellectual property. And sometimes it just doesn't mesh.
It seems like the human side of things always plays a big role.
Always, yeah.
Even in a super high-tech field like 3D printing. Now, the article also mentioned that governments are getting more involved in 3D printing investments, especially when it comes to defense. Which makes sense, right? With all the geopolitical stuff happening and the push to make things locally.
Definitely. And that adds a whole other layer to things. Because governments, they're driven by national security and economic goals.
Sure.
So their investments can really influence which companies and technologies end up being successful.
It's a powerful force. Like NATO, they've got that 1 billion innovation fund, and they're backing companies like SpaceForge and iComet. They're doing some really cool stuff with 3D printing.
I've heard of them.
SpaceForge, they're making super lightweight, high-performance materials. And iComet, they're actually working on manufacturing in space.
Wow, in space.
I know, wild.
That's really taking it to the next level.
Right, it shows you how transformative this technology can be. It's not just about improving what we already do, it's about creating entirely new possibilities.
I completely agree.
So we've got an industry that's maturing, focus on practical uses, these end-to-end solutions, and governments getting involved. Sounds like a lot of positive momentum for 3D printing.
It does.
But are there challenges that could slow things down? Roadblocks in the road, so to speak?
There always are, right? I think one of the biggest challenges is that after you print a 3D part, you often have a lot of extra work to do, like removing support structures, smoothing surfaces, and making sure it meets the right specs.
Ah, so it's not just hit print and you're done. There are all these extra steps.
Wow.
That sounds like it could cause delays and add costs.
Yeah, it can. It's definitely something the industry is working on, especially if they want to do mass production with 3D printing. And then there's...
Because if you're 3D printing a part for an airplane or a medical implant, you can't have any doubts about the materials.
Right, absolutely. You need to be 100% sure they're up to the task. If people don't trust the materials, it'll hold back the whole industry. And this is where the software side comes in again.
Okay, how so?
If you have good software, it can monitor and control every step of the printing process, including the materials. So that helps build trust.
So it all ties together. The specialization, the end-to-end solutions, the challenges with the extra steps and the materials, and then the software plays a key role in overcoming all of that. It really paints a picture of an industry that's growing up, moving from hype to actually delivering real-world results.
Exactly. And that's what investors are looking for now. Companies that are smart, A&D practical, companies that can solve those real-world problems. And that's going to lead to sustainable growth. But we've just scratched the surface here. Why don't we take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about some specific companies and technologies that are driving all of this.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so let's dive into some of these companies that are really making waves in 3D printing. Earlier, we were talking about those application-focused companies, the ones that are solving specific problems. And the article highlights Conflux Technology. They're making these advanced heat exchangers.
Yeah, heat exchangers.
For aerospace, I'll admit, not the most exciting thing at first glance.
Right.
But I bet they're crucial in those high-performance aircraft.
They're essential, yeah. And that's exactly what investors are picking up on. Conflux, they're not going for flashy gadgets. They're tackling a real engineering challenge, and in a really important industry, too. So it shows how 3D printing can offer practical solutions, even in demanding fields like aerospace.
So focusing on those niche but critical applications can really pay off.
Absolutely.
Another company that stood out to me was 6K Additive. They're a materials company, right?
Yep. They specialize in these high-performance metal powders, specifically for 3D printing. What's really cool about them is their production process is way more efficient and sustainable than the traditional methods.
So they're not just supplying the materials, they're innovating on how to make them, too.
Exactly.
Which is pretty appealing to investors who care about sustainability.
For sure.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic of innovative materials, Equispheres is another one to watch.
The Equispheres, okay.
They're laser-focused on making these perfectly spherical metal powders. And the article explained how that leads to much higher quality in the final 3D printed parts.
So it's all about precision and performance, not just printing something, but printing it better, more efficiently, and with more control over the end result.
That's a key point. In an industry that's maturing like 3D printing, those small improvements can make a huge difference.
They can be the deciding factor for a company when they're choosing which 3D printing solution to go with. Okay, let's get back to the software side of things. We talked about how there's not enough investment in 3D printing software and how that could hold back the industry.
Yeah.
Is anyone out there trying to fill that gap?
Well, Backflip, the company we mentioned before, they're definitely worth keeping an eye on. They're building this comprehensive software platform to manage the entire 3D printing workflow.
The whole thing?
Yeah, from design to production, quality control, everything.
So they're bringing that sophisticated software we see in other industries to 3D printing.
Exactly.
If they can pull it off, it could really change the way companies use 3D printing.
Absolutely.
So it's exciting to see all these companies pushing the boundaries. But beyond those specific companies, What about the bigger trends that are shaping investments? We talked about governments, especially in defense, but what else?
Sustainability is huge right now.
Mm,
Investors are looking for companies that are developing 3D printing processes and materials that are environmentally friendly.
makes sense. It's not just about profits anymore, it's about doing things the right way.
Right. And 3D printing, it already has the potential to reduce waste compared to traditional manufacturing.
Yeah.
But there's always room to do better. The companies that can show they're serious about sustainability, they'll have a big advantage.
So it's not just appealing to ethical investors, it's a smart business move too.
Exactly.
So we're seeing investors' interests aligning with like broader societal values. It's not just about making money, it's about finding solutions that are good for the planet too.
That's a great way to put it.
And then, with all the geopolitical stuff going on, that's playing a role too.
Oh, absolutely. The tensions and the push to bring manufacturing back home, that's definitely fueling investment in defense applications. But it goes beyond that.
Okay, how so?
Well,
Oh, I-
think about all the trade wars and supply chain disruptions we've seen. They've shown how risky it is to rely on these complex global networks.
Right.
So 3D printing could be a solution, to create more resilient, localized supply chains.
So you can make things closer to where they're needed?
Exactly. And that's attracting interest from all sorts of industries, not just defense. You see it in medical devices, car parts, even consumer goods. Companies are exploring how 3D printing can help them become less dependent on global supply chains.
So it's not just about making things faster or cheaper anymore, it's about having more control and more
Okay.
flexibility.
Exactly.
It sounds like a whole new way of thinking about manufacturing.
It is. It's very exciting.
But before we get too carried away, let's remember those challenges we were talking about. What are some of the things that could really hold back the growth of 3D printing, even with all this positive momentum?
One of the biggest ones is standardization. There's still a lot of variation in materials, processes, and quality control.
I see.
And that makes it hard for companies to really embrace 3D printing on a large scale. They need to be confident that the materials they use, the printers they buy, the parts they make, that it's all going to meet certain standards no matter where they are in the world.
It's like you can't just have the cool technology. You need a solid foundation underneath it. You need rules and best practices.
Exactly. It's like building a house. You can have all the fancy materials, but if the foundation's weak, the whole thing could crumble.
Great analogy. And then there's the skills gap. We hear about this in every industry. Finding people with the right skills.
Yeah.
Is that a problem for 3D printing too?
Oh, absolutely. 3D printing is changing so fast, and it requires very specific knowledge. We need more education and training programs to teach people how to use this technology. And companies need to do their part too. Create training programs and good career paths to keep their skilled workers.
So it's a shared responsibility. We need to train new people and we need to keep the ones we already have.
Exactly. And if we don't solve this skills gap, it could really limit what the industry can achieve.
So we've got these exciting opportunities, but also some serious challenges. What's your outlook for the next few years? Where do you see the most potential for growth and disruption?
I think we'll see continued growth in those specialized areas, where 3D printing has a clear advantage. Things like medical implants, complex aerospace components, making spare parts on demand. Those are areas where 3D printing really shines. And as the technology gets better and more widely used, we'll see a lot of disruption in those industries.
Because those are areas where you need that customization, the ability to make complex shapes, and you need a variety of materials.
Exactly. And all those broader trends we talked about, like sustainability, localized production, end-to-end solutions, those are going to drive both innovation and investment in the years to come.
So for someone who's really paying attention to this industry, what are the key things to watch out for over the next 5 to 10 years, let's say?
I would say watch how companies tackle those core challenges: the post-processing bottleneck, material consistency, standardization. The companies that can solve those problems, they're going to be the leaders in the next wave of 3D printing growth.
So even though this is such a cool, futuristic field, it comes down to solving those practical, down-to-earth problems.
That's right. It's not just about the technology. It's about how it fits into the real world, how the supply chains adapt, how we train people to use it effectively. All of that matters.
It's like the next chapter in 3D printing, it's going to be less about the WW factor and more about those essential steps that take a promising technology and make it truly transformative.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It really is an exciting time to be watching this industry, and I think we're in for some amazing developments. But, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, why don't we take a step back and think about what we've learned so far?
All right, so we've talked about the shift towards specialized uses, the challenges of creating standards, and how important sustainability is. But now let's have some fun. Let's speculate a bit.
Hmm.
What are some of those really futuristic applications of 3D printing? The ones that could completely change the world down the road?
Well, one that comes to mind right away is bioprinting. It's getting a lot of attention these days.
Bioprinting.
Imagine being able to print functional organs
Mm-hmm.
for transplants. No more waiting for organ donors. It could save so many lives.
Printing organs. That sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie. Is that really possible? Or is it still a long way off?
It's still early, for sure, but the progress they're making is incredible. They've already printed simple tissues like skin and cartilage, and now they're working on more complex stuff like kidneys, even hearts.
Wow, that's amazing. Think of what that could do for healthcare. Solving the organ shortage, treating diseases in totally new ways, maybe even extending human lifespans.
Exactly. And that's just one example. There's also personalized medicine, using 3D printing to create drugs and therapies tailored to each person's unique genes.
Okay, now we're really getting into the future. It's almost hard to grasp all the possibilities. But those advancements, they're probably still years away, right? What about things that are closer to reality? Where do you see 3D printing making a real difference in the next 5, 10 years?
I think distributed manufacturing is going to be big. Instead of having these huge factories, companies could use 3D printing to make things closer to their customers, or even on demand, right where they're needed.
So instead of shipping things across the world, we could print them locally, maybe even at home. It's like 3D printing on a whole other level. Consumers become producers.
That's the idea. It could revolutionize supply chains, cut down on transportation costs and emissions, and give consumers a lot more control over what they buy.
I can see how that would change things, especially for retail and shipping companies. But what about the environmental impact? Won't all this 3D printing use up a ton of energy and resources? We were talking about how sustainability is important. So how does that fit in with the idea of 3D printing everywhere?
That's a good point, and it's something people are working on. They're already making more energy-efficient 3D printers and using sustainable materials like bioplastics and recycled metals.
Yeah.
The goal is to make 3D printing both revolutionary and sustainable.
Makes sense. If it's really going to change the world, it has to be good for the planet too. So we've talked about some pretty mind-blowing stuff today. Bioprinting, distributed manufacturing. But as we wrap things up, I have one last question for you. It's a bit philosophical, but I think it gets to the heart of what makes 3D printing so fascinating. What do you think is the ultimate potential of this technology? How could it fundamentally change the world? Not just the stuff we make, but how we live, work, and connect with each other.
Wow, that's a big question. And honestly, I think a lot of people are trying to figure that out right now as 3D printing keeps evolving. To me, the biggest potential is that it could democratize manufacturing, give individuals the power to create and innovate. Imagine a world where anyone, if they have an idea and a 3D printer, can make their ideas real without needing factories or complicated supply chains.
So it's not just for big companies anymore. Anyone could be an inventor, an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
That could lead to so many new products and solutions to problems we haven't even thought of yet.
And it could help communities become more self-reliant, producing things locally. It could have a huge impact on economic development, sustainability, and even social equality.
It's amazing to think we started by talking about investment trends, and now we're imagining a future where 3D printing changes the entire global economy
Yeah.
and empowers people all over the world. It really shows you the power of this technology.
And the thing is, it's still such a young field. There's so much more to discover. Researchers, entrepreneurs, even everyday people, they're all pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So to everyone listening, here's the question. What will you create with 3D printing? What problems will you solve? What amazing thing will you bring to the world? The future of this technology, maybe even the future of our world, is being shaped right now, and you can be a part of it.
I love that. And if you're interested in learning more about this amazing world of 3D printing, definitely check out that article we talk about, The State of Investing in 3D Printing, Expert Insights. It's from 3D Printing Industry, and it's full of great information.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of 3D printing investment. We hope you learned something, maybe had your mind blown a little, and hopefully you're feeling inspired. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring all the incredible things that technology has to offer.